والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to greet you Islamic greeting of peace. Thank you for joining us for the second part of a town hall meeting this afternoon. Our special guests are Andrew Lugar, U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, and Richard Thornton, FBI Special Agent in charge for Minneapolis. Many our Somali community are suffering a great stigma that is the result of terrorist activities that halfway around the world that none of us have any control over. Because of our large Somali population, we have had former elected officials calling Minnesota the land of 10,000 terrorists. Those of us who are Muslim and Somali face great prejudice and stigmatization simply because of our religion. We have come here today to examine how we can all become more successful Americans, asking our elected officials and the media to remind the general public that 99.9% of our immigrants and American-born Somalis are peace-loving, law-abiding people who deserve respect as we take our place within the landscape of American life. In this very building, our community has worked hard to provide good opportunities for our youth to engage in health activities that build good teamwork and leadership skills. We need to ensure that each of our youth has the community and the family resources needed to succeed and keep hope alive, that version of the American dream that's also available to them with the right amount of positive attitude and that amount of hard work. We have prepared 3 starting questions for today, and once we have addressed these with our guests, we will be asking you to pose your own question. So my friends, let me make very clear. This is our community meeting. U.S. Attorney nor the FBI had anything to do with this meeting. We organized, this meeting is owned by Somali American community. We invited these 2 gentlemen here today because they are public servants. These 2 gentlemen will make statements. They have 3 questions that we submitted to them earlier. But as I said at the beginning, you will have a chance to ask questions. This is going to be a part 2 dialogue. We will continue this dialogue because the security of this country is a very important to all of us. And also, we are sending another message that when Somali American community, the good name of Somali American community, I want to make an example here. When David or Johnson or Kathy or anybody else or white American, when they commit a crime, you don't say that the white American commit that crime. I want the same thing for the Muslim Americans and the Somali Americans. We have that right. If somebody commits, let the criminals, let the federal authorities and all of us, let federal do this job, investigate the crimes. But we cannot have a collective blame. That's something I want to underscore, that collective blame and collective responsibility. We, each one of us here, this country has been founded by individuals. The liberty and freedom of justice, that's what this country is founded. So this today's town hall meeting, what I'm asking you today is to be respectful. We will listen, we will examine. They have the questions, they will answer those questions. After they answer those questions, you will also answer questions. I will begin with the U.S. Attorney Andrew Lugar.
Thank you. I've prepared some remarks to sort of set the stage for the discussion that we're going to have today. My name is Andy Lugar. I am the United States Attorney for the District of Minnesota. Can you hear me? I became United States Attorney for Minnesota in February of 2014. At that time, I gave a speech, an address, to set forth what I would do as United States Attorney, my priorities, and what I would focus on as a federal prosecutor. I talked about stopping heroin trafficking, I did not say one word about terrorism or terror recruiting. Like many people, in early 2014, I thought the problem of terror recruiting in Minnesota was behind us. The wave of people leaving Minnesota to join Al-Shabaab seemed like a long time ago. So when I assessed the threats to public safety in Minnesota, I talked about other things. But the sad reality for all of us is that terror recruiting is not a thing of the past. ISIL is recruiting throughout the United States, and they are recruiting here. That is why I have been so clear in all of my public discussions. We have a terror recruiting problem in Minnesota. It does not help to ignore it, and we can't deny it. We have to stop it, and we have to do it together. As I'm going to discuss, there is a lot that law enforcement can and is doing, but it's a deeper problem than just a law enforcement issue. So let me explain what a United States Attorney is and what I do. I am Minnesota's Chief Federal Prosecutor. I work for the Department of Justice. There are 93 United States attorneys around the country. We are the lawyers who represent the United States if somebody sues the federal government. We're also the country's lawyers when somebody does something wrong and we think that a civil action will turn it around. I cannot stand here today and go through the details of the case that has brought many of you here today to hear about. The rules do not allow it, and most of those rules are put in place to help those who are charged. And I understand it from having been a defense lawyer. But what I can tell you will be the truth. Here's what I expect of you. Be honest back. Tell me the truth. And tell each other the truth. There are a lot of rumors going around the community. Before you believe a rumor, before you believe some allegation that somebody says in a coffee shop, online, or somewhere else, take a deep breath and ask some questions. And I'll talk about that in a second. Have respect for us, disagree with us, push us, tell us where you think we're wrong. That's how anybody gets better. But do it honestly, do it openly, with respect. I want to be very, very clear about one of the concerns that we've heard in the community. We don't entrap people. We don't set people up. It's wrong. It's contrary to what justice requires. I won't do it. I won't stand for it. And it's not something we do. Now, I can tell you that as passionately as possible. But you don't have to believe me. And I understand that. You can question government. It's one of the beautiful things about this country. I have questioned government. There's nothing wrong with that. But consider this. Given how open and how fair our system is, with every single person charged with a crime getting a top-notch lawyer, paid for by the court, with an open courtroom, with the opportunity to challenge every single thing the government has done, why on earth would we entrap people? There are no secrets. If we did that, it would be exposed. If we did that, it would play out in court. We don't do it because it's wrong. We don't do it because it won't work in any case. And I want you to know that even though I'm not at the FBI, I work with them. No case, no criminal case is brought in Minnesota, no federal criminal case is brought in Minnesota without me approving it. Nobody gets charged unless I say so. It's a tremendous responsibility. It keeps me up at night. I think about cases in the middle of the night and what's the right thing to do. And you're going to disagree with me. Some of my best friends disagree with me about some of the cases that we bring, drug cases, business cases, other cases. But I want you to know that I am doing what I believe justice requires in every single case. Many times, we actually let people know when they're under investigation. We let people know that they may be facing charges in case they want to talk to us, bring evidence that shows that they're not guilty. Hire a lawyer and have that lawyer come talk to us. We do that all the time. Sometimes we let their family know so that they can come talk to us and explain why we shouldn't go forward with charges. But many times when we bring charges, people deny that that happened. There's nothing I can do about it. But let me be clear. We often tell people who are facing criminal charges that they are under investigation before they're ever charged. Another issue that has come up a lot in this community in the last few weeks that I want to talk about: cooperation. I have been working in the criminal justice system since 1987. You guys can look that up. People were actually walking around and talking in 1987. People cooperate against their friends in criminal cases all the time. It happens every day in the United States. My very, very, very first client, when I was a brand new lawyer, was a businessman who came to see me. Not me, came to see my boss. I was, believe it or not, pretty young back then. Came to see my boss, and I was brought in. And he told us about what he had been doing. He said, the only other person who knows about this is my best friend, Ivan. So we're good. we're in good shape because Ivan would never tell anybody what we did. Ivan would never cooperate against me. My boss looked at him and he said, he already has. And he's already recorded conversations with you. I didn't know that. I didn't know how my boss knew it. And the client denied it. My boss called the prosecutor and asked one question. Could you start playing over the phone the tape recordings? And they did. There's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing wrong with it. You may not agree with that practice, but it happens in gang cases, it happens in drug cases, it happens in business cases. Somebody involved in a crime decides to step out of what they're doing and cooperate against others. And it happens all the time. So when somebody raises with you a question about entrapment or whether somebody was set up, I suggest you do what an inquisitive person does and ask some questions back. How did that happen? What were they doing? Why would the government pick somebody to set up? For 18 years as a defense lawyer, and before that in the late 80s, my clients said that to me all the time. I was set up. I was entrapped. And most of the time, they really didn't know what they were talking about, but more importantly, it never was true. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying we, under my watch, won't do it. And so ask some critical questions. Ask about tapes. People have talked about the tapes in this case. And in other cases, people question tape recording. There are recordings in many, many cases in my office. As I said, it's not only legal, it's part of what we do. Why? Because quite often, a recording can be the best evidence. Witnesses can tell the truth, witnesses can lie. I've cross-examined witnesses as a defense lawyer. It's one of the most fun things you get to do. Poke holes in what they're saying, maybe prove that they're a liar. It's hard to cross-examine a tape recording. We have recordings in drug cases, in gang cases, in business cases. All right, so I've told you a bit about how this process works. A couple of things about how, having listened to you for over a year, I believe that together we can turn this around. Because no one wants terror recruiting to continue. It is serious, it is harmful, and we have to get it to stop. Now, some of the best ideas, all of the best ideas, come from other people, not from me. I've listened, and I've come up working together with others who are here today with a plan. Here's what I've been told. We're going to start to turn this around when every Somali teen who wants one will have a trusted mentor from the Somali community. When every Somali teen has access to safe spaces for arts, for culture, for sports, and for recreation. When coach doesn't have 100 people on the waiting list to join his soccer club. When every Somali teen has access to higher education, to jobs, to job training. When all of the doors of our community's success are open equally and fairly to everybody in this community. When law enforcement has more people in it who reflect the community. When law enforcement has resources to hire more people from the Somali community, both as sworn officers and as community relations officers. When youth programs at mosques are well funded, so our imams and our mosque directors don't have to spend so much time trying to scrape together the money for the great work that they do. When everybody with a concern at our airport about how they're being screened and treated has access to somebody who works at the airport to talk to and, if possible, to resolve their concern. And I'm proud to say that one-on-one meetings have already solved a number of people's problems at the airport. Not everybody, but many people. And when all of these community-related solutions go forward with great community support, with various community leaders leading them, and they have nothing to do with surveillance or spying. Now, what's wrong with that? Not a thing. It's what you all told me. And there's many, many more things that you told me that we're pursuing. How do we work with people who are charged with terrorism crimes so that they can turn their lives around and not waste away in prison? And how can we reintegrate into the community those coming out of prison now from prior prosecutions so they can be, as they want to be, helpful advocates for peace and safety going forward? We can disagree about the best way to solve these problems. I expect we will. But I ask you to work together, to work with me, so that we can move forward. Name-calling, rumors, and false accusations are going to get us nowhere. It's not going to help anybody. All I care about is that the solutions that I think we agree on get implemented and go forward. I have used the last year, particularly the last few months, to spend time to reach out to people I know, civic leaders, in the corporate community, in the foundation community, to invest in the Somali community with you. I believe, having talked to the families of those who have traveled overseas and have died or are over there still recruiting for ISIL, that every single young man or woman who leaves Minnesota and travels to Syria is a tragedy. And I am proud of the work we're doing to stop that tragedy from happening one person at a time. You can agree or disagree, but I will tell you this, that those men, young men who we have stopped, are alive today. I haven't asked him this question, but I would bet if you talked to Abdullahi Yusuf, who we stopped from leaving Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport to go to Syria, who was charged with a federal felony crime, who pled guilty and agreed in front of a court that he tried to join ISIL, I think if you talk to him, he would say that he's only alive today because he was stopped from going overseas. And if he goes to prison, he goes to prison. But he gets out of prison and he lives the rest of his life. And that's one of the things that matters most to me when I get up in the morning and I go to work. But the best thing that we can do together is to end this so no more young men and now young women have to face this problem. Nobody is recruited. Nobody is stopped. Nobody has to live with this hanging over their head. And I will get up every single morning as your United States Attorney, and I will dedicate every ounce of energy I have to working with you to turn this around. Thank you for inviting me.
Before I call Mr. Richard Thornton, I just would like to I want to thank for U.S. Attorney for his remarks. I'm talking about what kind of job his office does. But again, the emphasis that we hear today is that, first of all, I have the complaint of the 6 alleged here, is this question that U.S. Attorney Andrew Luger he touched on. That is, the many Somali residents believe that the government was involved in entrapment. He discussed it. With respect to the 6 arrested, how do you expect the community leaders to respond when we lack the facts in the case before us? You say that you cannot talk about it,
I can answer
but this is what we involve. What assurances can you provide that the entrapment was not the case and the youth were not set up so that the feds looked like they were doing their job?
Can I, want me to answer
Yes,
that?
yeah,
now?
go ahead.
So, the rules are I can't talk about a specific case, but I can do this. I urge you, if you haven't done it, I urge you to read the criminal case, the charges. Read them for yourselves. And then talk to somebody about what entrapment is, what being set up is. And the best assurance that anybody can give you that we don't engage in that behavior is what happens in court. Because I can assure you this. We won't do it. I won't do it. It's not going to be allowed in Minnesota. But as I said, if you don't believe me or you're suspicious of government, which is fine, the court will determine whether we did that. In any case, we have excellent, tough federal judges in this state. And when they disagree with us, they are not shy about saying it. And we have excellent, tough criminal defense lawyers in this state. People I've worked with when I was a criminal defense lawyer, and I'm proud to know them. And they will fight to the bitter end for their clients. And that's the best assurance we have. My word is my word. I've given it to all of you. And I'll say it again and again at any forum that anybody invites me to. Because I stand for justice, not setting people up. But you don't know me that well. So let's let the court system decide, because that's how our criminal justice system works. And let's see justice done in court. That's my best answer to you, my friend.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call Mr. Richard Thornton, FBI Special Agent in Charge, Minneapolis. The floor is yours.
Enemies, foreign and domestic. Every FBI employee, every FBI agent, every FBI employee takes the same oath. It is something that is sacred. It is something that is very solemn to us. When we do it, we're not just saying some words. When we take this oath, we're making a solemn commitment to this country and to the people we serve, to everyone in this room. That's our commitment as a starting point. We are going to defend and protect the Constitution of this great country. Excuse me. It's not something we do only when it's convenient or when we feel like it. This is something we do each and every day. It is how we do our jobs. It is how we go about serving the American public on a daily basis. At a minimum, that's a starting point. It's an expectation for every FBI employee that works in the state of Minnesota, every FBI employee that works for you. We are going to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. Although everyone has heard of the FBI, I'm not sure everybody here, or everyone period, truly understands what the FBI does and what we don't do. So I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about that. First of all, the FBI is a national security, a law enforcement, and a domestic intelligence agency. 3 different roles. They're related, but they're 3 different and distinct roles. We investigate approximately 300 matters, violations of federal law. U.S. Attorney talked about a lot of the things his office prosecutes. We investigate many of those. We investigate gangs and bank robberies and drugs, complex financial crimes, public corruption. We investigate civil rights matters, computer intrusions, kidnappings, espionage, organized crime, healthcare fraud, the list goes on and on. I'm not going to list all 300 of them, we'd be here for a while. But it gives you an idea of the breadth of what we do. The FBI is also the nation's lead federal agency for investigating and preventing acts of terrorism. It is the #1 priority of the FBI to protect the United States and United States persons around the world from any sort of terrorist activity. That's a little bit about what we do. I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk about how we go about doing our mission. First of all, everything we do is done in accordance with the laws of the United States and again with absolute adherence to the Constitution. In most instances, almost every instance, FBI policy is more restrictive than the Constitution and never less restrictive. So I've got the first question, or first question, a little quiz here I want to ask you. How many pages of policy do you think the FBI has? Somebody take a guess. How many? How many? 2 million. Pages, not words. No, we have a lot of pages. Anybody else? You don't win anything if you get it right, but we have 11,716 pages of policy. So to give you some perspective, you know those boxes that copy paper comes in, big boxes? That's like 2.5 boxes of paper. That's what sets forth how we go about doing what we do. So in addition to our policy, we have the Attorney General Guidelines. We have our own manual, which is called our Domestic Investigative and Operations Guide. This details our authorities for how we conduct our investigations and the techniques we use. So when I talk about techniques, think of them as tools that we need to do our job. So just like a carpenter that has a hammer and a saw that he uses as tools of his trade, the techniques that we use to conduct investigations, those are our tools. Our tools are numerous. They include such things as, some are fairly obvious. We talk to people, conduct interviews. We review records. We look at documents. We look on the internet. We look at social media. We can conduct surveillance, basically just watch people, see what they're doing. We can issue subpoenas. We can do search warrants. A number of tools that we have to do our job. And again, just like that carpenter I spoke of before, can't build a house without tools. We can't conduct our investigations with our tools. So the Constitution, the laws of the United States, our Attorney General Guidelines, our internal policies, all of these things determine which investigative techniques we can use in particular cases, particular circumstances. Those guide us in determining when it's appropriate to use those tools, when it's legal to use those tools. I think it makes sense, kind of intuitive, but the more intrusive an investigative technique is, the higher the authority levels are. Certain things, going out and doing an interview, going out and just talking to a member of the public.
I don't know, it's kind of weird.
A little feedback coming here.
Yeah, can we turn it down a little bit? It's just, that's a little better, right?
Okay. So anyway, depending on the intrusiveness of the technique will determine, who has to authorize that. And in the most intrusive techniques, we have to go to court. A judge has to sign a search warrant, a wiretap, and some of the more intrusive techniques. These are all some of the checks and balances that exist to ensure that we are adhering to the Constitution. So the FBI, along with every other law enforcement agency in the United States and pretty much the rest of the world, uses people for sources of information. In many cases, they're confidential sources. We call them, our term in the FBI is a confidential human source. Called by many different names. Informants, confidential sources, cooperating witnesses. There's a list of different things that are all describing the same thing. People cooperate or assist law enforcement and the FBI for a variety of reasons. Many do it out of patriotism. Some do it because they've been a victim of a crime. Some do it for money. Some do it because they're facing criminal charges. Many people do it because in their heart and in their mind, it's the right thing to do, to try to assist the government to prevent a crime or to help the government solve a crime. They're doing it, again, I want to repeat that, many people do it because of their heart and mind. They believe it is the right thing to do. We have people who our confidential sources. They tell us about what gangs are doing. They tell us about what drug dealers are doing. They tell us about people who are trying to take advantage and victimize young girls. They tell us about what organized crime figures are doing, and so on. We have people that tell us what foreign adversaries are doing. We have sources that tell us what North Korea is doing in their quest to build weapons of mass destruction. There are a lot of things that we use confidential sources for. It is a tool of the trade. We also have people in the community that tell us about those who are interested in joining terrorist groups or interested in committing acts of terror. I would ask you to instead of being upset at people in the community who are trying to do the right thing and help the community safe, I'd like you to look at it from maybe a little different perspective. While you're sitting here today doing an act of public service by engaging with us on these issues that are important, what if there was somebody that was going to take advantage of that and break into your house and steal all your valuables while you're here? Someone in the community knew about that, overheard him talking about that. Wouldn't you want that person to come forward and try to prevent that criminal act? Is it really any different for expecting someone to come forward to talk about preventing people from traveling to join a foreign terrorist organization or committing an act of terror? Is it really any different? I don't think it is. Finally, on this point, the courts have consistently held that the use of confidential sources is legal and it's appropriate. In my opinion, it would be irresponsible for the FBI to not use these tools that are available to us, that are legal and that are constitutional. But I will also tell you, and I will assure you, that there's probably no technique that the FBI utilizes that we don't scrutinize more heavily to ensure that our use of confidential sources is legal and appropriate. I want to speak to something that I've heard a number of people make reference to, and that is, why should we care if people leave the United States to join ISIL, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, or another foreign terrorist organization? First of all, we care because it's against the laws of the United States. Our elected officials have dictated through policy that we're going to enforce those laws. Secondly, and this is my opinion, it's also because these groups are evil at their core. They commit murder and other atrocities on an unprecedented scale. These groups also have stated goals which are wholly incompatible with the American way, with life in the United States, with what this country stands for. And they are, today and as long as they exist, will be a grave threat to the United States and everyone that wants to be an American citizen or part of this country. I want to be clear about this. I want to be very clear. If anyone makes a choice to travel to join one of these terrorist organizations, then I'm going to do everything in my power and the power of the FBI to prevent that from happening. I don't care what the circumstances are. I realize there are people in the community that, they're disenfranchised. They're unhappy with the way things are, economic opportunities, sense of fairness, all kinds of reasons why you can be unhappy with life here in Minnesota or the United States. But making a conscious choice to join a group whose stated goal is to destroy our way of life, it's illegal, and it will lead nowhere but to one of two places: federal prison, or likely their death if they succeed in joining a terrorist organization. On the other hand, there are so many constructive ways that you can go about trying to bring change. Just as it's illegal to try to overthrow the United States government through violent means, it's also illegal to go and join a terrorist organization whose stated goal is to undo what this country stands for, and that of as well as our allies around the country, around the world, I'm sorry. I would also like to discuss something I've observed, and I'm a little troubled by this because I'm not sure how widespread this is, but I do know it exists, so I want to share this concern and also to ask for your help. So I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of people in our community do not support young people traveling to join terrorist organizations. And they've also expressed to me personally and to the people that I work with a desire for us to help stop that. My concern is this: although many people, most people, want us to stop people from traveling, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in terms of their willingness to accept the realities and how we go about doing that. And what I mean is that if you want us to prevent people from traveling, we're going to have to use the techniques we talked about. We're going to have to conduct the interviews. We're going to have to be in the community. We're going to have to serve search warrants and issue subpoenas and do surveillance. And we're going to have to use confidential sources. Okay? That's the way we get to the point where we can stop people from traveling. Okay, so that's kind of the first disconnect. Don't ask me to deliver these results, but then not expect me to do the job that it's going to take to get there. The second disconnect, I think, is the backlash when we are successful at doing our job in terms of preventing someone from traveling, but then having issues with the fact that we have taken the logical step of charging somebody with a crime, arresting them and charging them when they violate the crime. Again, it is no different than going back to that made-up story about somebody coming in your house and burglarizing it. You would expect that that person, if they come in, burglarize your house, that they'll be arrested and charged. Okay. Again, if you violate a federal law, it is my job, it's my obligation, it's the FBI's obligation to investigate that and present it for prosecution. Finally, I want to discuss the feeling of the perception that I've heard that the FBI is targeting the Somali community. At any given time, my office has several thousand investigations underway across the 3 states that I'm responsible for. And it's all those type of cases I talked about before. It's the bank robberies, it's the gang cases, it's the drug cases, et cetera, et cetera. We open investigations, we conduct investigations based on credible information that a crime may have been committed. That's what we do. We don't target anybody because of how they look, where they come from, what their nationality is, what their religion is, and so forth. We base our investigations on credible information that someone may have violated a federal law within our jurisdiction. There are far too many threats, every one of you. That's the young people at the table over here, and everyone else in this room, everyone else in this community. I want to thank you for everything you do. I want to thank you for having enough interest in what's going on to come out here today and spend some time with us, hear our perspective, and share a dialogue on this matter of mutual concern. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity and also giving U.S. Attorney the opportunity to speak to you and for everything you do to keep this country and this community safe. So thank you very much.
Before I begin the questions, Mr. Thornton, in light of what's happening in Baltimore and Ferguson, Missouri, I think you're here saying that you don't care about there is a lack of opportunity or there's a structural problem that the community is facing. And you closed your statement by saying that you want to work with us and build partnership. How can you reconcile those two?
That's what you said. You said you don't care about lack of opportunity.
No, he said structure. He said
Yeah.
No, I didn't say I didn't care about lack of opportunity. I said,
That's not.
You can clarify. Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. No, I didn't say I didn't care about the lack of opportunity. What I was saying is that I don't care about the circumstances that lead us to the point of people being unhappy. There are constructive ways to deal with disenfranchisement, lack of opportunities, and so forth. You know, choosing to join a terrorist group, choosing to try to overthrow the government. There are constructive ways and there are illegal ways to do it. And my position, my feelings is that obviously let's find constructive ways to deal with those things. Let's not, you know, joining ISIL or Al-Shabaab and so forth is not a constructive outlet for, regardless of the circumstance. It just isn't.
Thank you.
Okay.
Since you brought up the CVE, that means those of you as a counter violent extremism. Recently, The Economist magazine ran an article, and I'm quoting the article here, and I think they interviewed Sharif Stanek. So Sharif Stanek believes that countering violent extremism would be better served if he received promised federal funds to expand his community engagement team from 6 members to 12. So this is the question here. Do you think this is the best use of funds to address the underlying community problems and issues that help recruiters? How do we look at the severe unemployment, buffers, gangs in this discussion? Again, there's another question here. Does locking up these young men actually make our community safer? How do we provide hope and better future for these young people?
It's a good question. I think we have to do all of it at the exact same time. And so let me explain how that works. There are different pots of money for different things. So when Sheriff Stanek, I didn't read the article, I haven't gotten to my Economist yet, but when Sheriff Stanek talks about doubling the number of law enforcement in his office, and a member of his office is here, or when Chief Harto wants to do it, or Chief Smith wants to do it, I think we all basically believe that's a good thing. Now, does getting money for that mean we're getting less money for job opportunities and programs like, is that your question?
The question.
Is that the best way versus dealing with unemployment is what I heard your question.
The question was, is the money the answer?
Oh, look, money is never the full answer.
There's an underlying problem, the
Sure.
gangs, poverty.
Okay, so gangs, it's a multi-part question. One of the first things I heard in one of my very first meetings last June was that the gangs are a problem in the Somali community, and I heard it from religious leaders and others. Can we address the gangs? And I said I would, and here's what we're doing. We have a federal law enforcement task force working on the gang problem now. I want to tell you something. In order to prosecute gangs, whether it's the Southside Minneapolis gangs, the Northside Minneapolis gangs, gangs in the Somali community, gangs in St. Cloud, we've got gangs throughout the state. We need people to cooperate. And I know that raises concerns when it comes to terrorism cases. It's the exact same thing in gang cases. So we just took down, in the last few months, the leadership of 2 large gangs, the Young and Thuggin gang and the 1-9ers. And we did that in part because people within the gangs cooperated with the FBI and with us. We are working on the gang problem in the Somali community. I promised I would do it, and I am. As far as unemployment is concerned and job opportunities, here's what, in talking with all of you, here's what I did. I've reached out to corporate citizens, corporate leaders in Minnesota, and I've begun to introduce them to Somali community leaders. I work with a 15-person committee, many of whom are here today, who are sort of spearheading my effort, this effort, and who are leading the effort, and who are meeting with corporate leaders right now. Every corporation that we have met with, sometimes the meetings I'm there, sometimes I'm not. Every meeting, the request is asked to help the community with jobs, job opportunities, and the answer at every single meeting so far has been yes. And so a company that I know some of the leaders of have met and talked about creating internships for promising young high school students in their corporate headquarters. I have nothing to do with it other than making the introduction. But I want you to know what's happening, because I don't think it's helpful, and I think it's a conversation the community needs to have amongst itself. After that company committed to having an internship program after another company committed, after meeting with community leaders, to have a mentorship program that they're going to fund. After every meeting, they get an email or a phone call demanding that they not do it, demanding that they not work with the 15 leaders who are implementing the pilot program because it's going to be about spying and it's going to be about surveillance. I can't say this enough. Nothing that we're doing with internship programs, with job opportunities, with arts and culture and sports, none of it has anything to do with spying. None of it. I'm making introductions to people I know. Other people are doing it as well. It's all for the good of the community. But it confuses people in Minnesota when they agree to do something that they want to do. The response is always, this is something I believe my company, my foundation should do. It's the response we get over and over again. It's the response I got from the governor. And the committee members are hearing that in all the meetings that they're doing. And then an email or a letter goes out condemning the company or the foundation. I ask you to talk about that, have an honest discussion. There's got to be a better way to move this forward so that it helps the community, which is all any of us really want.
Thank you. Before, I think I will take more questions here because the CVE is something really, this is the bulk of it. The Somali American, the CVE, this pilot program, why is this program specifically designed for Somalis, Somali Americans, or even Muslim Americans? If this works, why will it be different? Because why it has to be the Somalis? Why do we have to treat Somali Americans different than another group of this country?
Okay. Two answers to that question. First of all, when I started asking people what they wanted, people in this community, at dozens of meetings, I said, what are the problems in the community, and what, if anything, do you want me or the federal government to do about it? Those were the questions. People started talking about the very issues that you're raising right here. People told me, this is an underserved community. Federal grants seem to go elsewhere, but not to the benefit of this community. Why is that? And I heard that over and over and over again. And I said, what do you want me to do about it? And the answer was, take action. And it was said to me in a very direct, almost hostile way. Mr. Lugar, this is almost exactly how this question and answer went. Mr. Lugar, we have been talking about these problems. Unemployment, lack of mentorship, lack of opportunities, lack of support. For years, nobody has done anything about it. None of our federal leaders have done anything about it. Do something. At the very same time, I learned that the White House was putting together this program. And I don't use the term CVE. I was told very early on by some of you in this room, we don't like that term. It's offensive. So I said, what are we going to call it? What should we call the work that we do here? And we came up with, not me, somebody came up with the phrase building community resilience. It's not my term, it's not my phrase. But it made sense to me. And that's the phrase that we use. And a number of us who are involved in this nationally said to the White House, we don't really appreciate that term. We're not going to use it. But we were asked to build a program that made sense in Minnesota that the community asked for. And for months upon months upon months, I went to meetings in mosques, in settings like this, and I heard what people wanted us to do, to get the grant funding for mentoring, to get funding for after-school opportunities, to get the corporations involved in job opportunities. not to target the Somali community, but to help this community that people have said across the board is underserved. Other communities have had help in these areas. We can argue about whether it's enough, whether they need more or not, but it became clear from talking to everybody that this community was underserved, so we're trying to correct that. It is not to target this community, it's to assist this community. And it wasn't until very, very recently, after putting together the pilot program with people in this room, with imams who saw it, read it, looked at it, and we debated exactly how the money should be used. We're still having that debate. It's only then, after all of this was put together, and we were invited to the White House to meet with the President and the Vice President of the United States, this community, that we started hearing about how bad this program was. So I think people need to ask, where did that come from? Why did that start so late in the game? Why was it that community leaders, some of whom are here in the room today, were sitting as far as you and I are together? That's how far we were from the Vice President of the United States. And when the imam was talking to the Vice President of the United States and explaining the issues that we have in our community, when other community leaders were saying to him, this is what we need, and I watched him. He took notes. He was handing them to his assistant. We're having a running dialogue about how to bring resources to this wonderful community. At the very same time, there was a press conference denouncing what we were doing. Everybody's got the right to say what they think. I don't understand that.
Well, Mr. Attorney, we're going to stick to the CVE, counter-violent extremism. This is a very, very important. Hold a second. Hold on a second. We will open the floor. Hold on a second. Please, in order here. Here it is. Okay? Counter-violence extremism. You said that it was something that come from the community. The community come from.
Yes.
As you know that, this community, there is a 50 organizations, that my organization is one of them. And I think CARE is one of them. They sign a letter because they see this counter-violence extremism, this program, whatever you call it, is top-down approach. You form your own task force. You did not consult the community widely, and you did not approach all the community, and this is dividing our community. What can you do about it? Because the community is divided on this issue.
Well, so I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to disagree with you that I didn't consult widely in the community. I went to forum after forum. I held meeting after meeting. Broad base of people were invited. And I'm telling you that we talked about this pilot program for months. And I kept hearing the same issues. You've raised them yourself, sir. You said job opportunities. And so the federal government assists communities all across America, Somali, non-Somali, Muslim, non-Muslim, Native American community, Hispanic community. There are grants that go to all of these communities. And I was asked by people, why are those grants not coming to the Somali community? There's a wonderful organization, or I think it's wonderful, called the Northside Achievement Zone that works with the African American community in a very specific neighborhood in North Minneapolis. They got a $29 million federal grant. If this community does not want that kind of a grant, then that has to be discussed. But just as you say to me, you didn't consult broadly, which I disagree with. Those who are writing the letters and saying to the corporations, don't do this, you have to decide, do they speak for those who want to go forward? Do they speak for everybody in the community? Do they have, again, everybody's got a right to speak, to write letters, to petition, to criticize me, to criticize others. That's America. But I think there has to be a dialogue within the community, not to divide it, but to bring it together. Because the things we're talking about, job opportunities, after-school programs, I think there's broad agreement on. And so the question is, what's the best way to do it? I think it makes sense for the federal government to provide resources. Not everybody wants that, okay? But there are tens of millions of dollars in grants that are going to be awarded around the country that have nothing to do with spying or surveillance. They come from all sorts of departments. Let's rally all of that. Let's work together, you and me. Let's work together with CARE and with others who disagree with what I'm doing, but let's make sure this community is served. I'm open to ideas, but I don't think anybody gets to dictate to the rest of the community how it's done. So let's have a respectful dialogue.
Thank you very much.
First of all, I just wanted to address, I know a few people in the room mentioned CARE. CARE stands for the Council of American Islamic Relations. I'm the executive director for the Minnesota chapter. And so I know that some people mentioned CARE, so if you don't mind, I'd like to at least address a few things. First of all, I think I'd like to thank Sadiq and for all of you for being here and for both of our guests today. I just have a couple of comments and a question that I have. First of all, you know, I came onto the job at CARE January 1st. I learned about CVE, Countering Violence Extremism, which was announced in September 11, 2014. And 3 cities were identified. So in January, I figured out, and I wanted to know more about what the U.S. Attorney was doing. I met with the U.S. Attorney before that, and he's come to our community and talked to different people. And so the first conversation I had with you, which I didn't think of anything, was actually I called, I think you and I think Angela and Ben were on the call. And the first question that you asked me, which surprised me a little bit, was, are you recording this, Jilan? And I was a little bit took back. I didn't know, did I have to record the conversation? But that automatically set me back a little bit. First of all, I think we have to recognize that law enforcement, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, are assets for our community. And supporting them in their effort to do their work is important for the betterment of our community. And since before Todd Jones and we've, as a community, I've always believed that we've done a good job. Is there areas to improve? Absolutely. And the U.S. Attorney went on a listening session with something unique, and we were very welcome to that. He came to our mosque and community centers, and he listened to us. And there were certain concerns that we put at the top. One of the first one was, can you deal with this issue with the Abu Huraira Mosque? And most of you are aware of that mosque. That case actually originated at CARE. We were the first ones to take on the case. We fought it in the public arena in front of the city council. It did not work. So we worked with our allies, those who we believe help us, like the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we actually presented to Todd Jones, who was the previous U.S. Attorney's Office, and he worked on it, and his staff worked on it. And when the U.S. Attorney, Andrew Lugar, came up, we reminded him this is an important issue, and he delivered on that. And all of us thanked him for that, and we recognize his effort, and we need to recognize that our partnership and our relationship is not necessarily just because we're talking about CVE that I'm not going to call the U.S. Attorney or not meet with him. I think we just need to understand that a little bit, because maybe there's been some anxiety about how we've been talking about this conversation. Since that, we of course had a conversation about CVE. The U.S. Attorney invited us and the ACLU of Minnesota, the NAACP, the Somali Bar Association, members of a diverse group, and we looked at the program. And in that program, we identified some of the concerns that we initially identified. And it's not about surveillance. I know the U.S. Attorney is mentioning surveillance is one issue. And the only reason that issue is there is because we have on record 2 programs that happen in Minnesota, AIM, COP, and SCOT, which we have documents proving that those programs were supposed to be part of an outreach that had blurred the lines of surveillance. So we wanted to make sure that we have guarantees. And so the surveillance part is one of the issues, and what we've recommended, and even the statement that went out, was to just have safeguards. Surveillance is a tool that law enforcement use, and it's something that helps our community. So it's not just about that. But going back to the issue of CVE, after that meeting, I found out something that started to become a pattern. And I want to address it here because I believe this is something important. On January 30, we held a meeting, a community forum to talk about those past programs and how as a community we need to learn about how to better work with the law enforcement. 2 of my speakers got a call from your office, and they were told, why are you coming to Minnesota? Why are you presenting on this topic? And they themselves told me that. They told me that. Well, so that started to spiral into a different something that I was not really aware about. And
No, I'm just gonna write down.
and so that was, so I started to see a pattern that in that meeting itself, when January 30th, where we had all the members of different organizations who were listening to this program, we provided some suggestions. One of the first ones was, you know, if we as a community, as a struggling immigrant community, Muslim American community, Somali American community, we need resources. And we believe these resources are being held up in places that are supposed to serve our community. The social service organizations, the foundations, and we believe we need these resources, not just to address the radicalization issue, but many of the other issues that our community deal with. So instead of to confuse the two things, let's create an opportunity where all organizations can come into a room and receive funding without the fear of being part of a national security threat program. And so in that discussion, we provided feedback. Unfortunately, I felt that, and since then till now, that there has been some sort of selective listening by your office, that you're not listening to the concerns that we've had. And so I even sent you an email 4 weeks ago asking just to meet up and just to talk about, because we talked before. It's not, you know, U.S. attorneys, we actually had a one-on-one conversation, so it's not like, and I've requested that just to update you and to talk about these differences. Of course, I did not get an email from you. I did get an email from your other staff on the other matters that I was hoping we could meet about. So through that, we started to see that you were not willing to listen. You just saw as CARE as someone who just does not want to work with you. And that is factually incorrect. We believe, and every single one person in this room, we believe that, and it pains all of us to see one child lost, and one child going away from this country joining a terrorist organization. All of us are affected by that. And so in even those conversations, we asked you to do something very basic, and you've mentioned it, but you haven't done it in the public arena. You've done it in these rooms, but we need you to do it in the public arena, and that was to speak up for our community, to talk about the great work that you're doing, that you're meeting with our imams. And you had 2 great opportunities. The first one was when Al-Shabaab sent a video threat. Unfortunately, at that time, I met with members of the task force, and I want to just mention this. The task force, the 17 member, you remember? These are my friends. These are people I've worked with for a very long time. I believe they're in that room with you, just like all of us would be in that room with you, to deal with this issue and to address it. But even the members of that task force, we sat together on a late, I think, Sunday night, and drafted a letter, and we shared it to the community. What we were missing was your voice. And unfortunately, because of the politics of the Department of Justice, at that time there was a freeze. In my members of my community believe that incident was used in a way to get the funding let go. And I don't believe that that's a genuine way of looking at the issue, but it was a political move to our sense. If you would have came out that day and said, listen, the Somali American community is a community that's resilient, the community that's working on this issue, the community that's affected by this thing. And we shouldn't fear this community, we should be working with this community. And on that day, there is a threat, and that threat is available on any day, and our community should be aware. That type of voice is needed to sense calm. And so in the last recent 6 arrests, you had another opportunity when Norm Coleman took your words and called all of us, and in this great state, that Minnesota now is a land of 10,000 terrorists. And I understand you don't have to respond to every single person out there who makes a statement. I understand you don't have to respond to that. But when a former senator, someone who's respected in the circles of our community, and many members of our community even voted for him, makes a statement and uses your own words, that affects us. And so therefore, the CVE program is not just about surveillance. It's about stigma that it brings to our community. We're the only ones being targeted for this thing, while radicalization and extremism affects many people. The FBI themselves in their statistics show that we as a Muslim community only represent 6% threat since post-September 11. And so it's important that we understand that this project can move forward. It needs to move forward with our community. So we had a statement that went out last Friday, and it represented about 50 organizations. And those 50 organizations were called by reporters who are being told that, did you actually sign the statement? Because we believe CARE is just making stuff up. Did you sign it? I had a student organization that called me and said, listen, Jelani, we had a conversation about CBE. You mentioned the information to us. We agree with this narrative, and therefore we ourselves are signed it. But what happened? Why are reporters calling us and telling us that this statement that you made was forged by CARE? And that, I believe, is starting to build a sense of bullying tactics where if we're not agreeing with you on this matter, that you have, and your office uses every disposal to just close its ears on this subject. And so one of the things I want to just to highlight this issue at the Yale Rep. One of the things I wanted just to highlight, and I think it's not here an opportunity to name call or bash your organization or to talk about. I think there's an opportunity here that's being missed. And the fact that you mentioned it, and I actually commend you on that. You stumbled on one of the most important issues in our community, the lack of resources for our community. This is a huge gap, and no one in here disagrees with you on that. I believe where do we move forward is we hold those institutions who are responsible to help our community to do that. So those young men that were sitting over there and coach, it's not your job to solve their problem. You know who's failing them? It's not you. Who's failing them is the Minneapolis Park Board, the St. Paul Park Board, who are not giving these young men opportunity to help our youth. I agree with you that you are here to help and you listen to our community. Now you also need to listen to the broader sense of community so that when we move forward, these programs do not divide us, they do not create an ineffective program, they actually support what's happening and they make that happen. And I think we still have that opportunity here in the room. I want to final point is this. For many of you are thinking, why is Jelani and CARE just so, the reality is these types of efforts have actually been tried. Go to the United Kingdom. There's a program called Prevent. The same ideas. But the problem is our community had disagreements, and those disagreements created an opportunity where the law enforcement couldn't do their job, and the community couldn't follow along. Here in Minneapolis, we have an opportunity to bring all these people together. And I actually served on Todd Jones' Somali Advisory Council, and I believe as a community we need to support and work with our law enforcement. We should not be isolated when we say no. When we say no, that does not mean we are leaving the table. We're here to renegotiate, and you have to allow for that. Thank you.
So, okay, a couple of things. One, I didn't stumble onto the issues that we're dealing with here. They were raised by community members with me. So there wasn't a matter of, I want to respond to a number of things that you said. And so one is that I stumbled upon the issues. I didn't stumble upon them. People in this room raised these issues with me and demanded action. That's number one. Number two, I want to address a number of things you said. CARE was the first community organization I called when I got this job. It was the first meeting I had. We had a number of meetings. And CARE was, in fact, the impetus behind the Abu Huraira suit, which my office then took to federal court. And I applauded CARE for that when we announced the lawsuit. So what happened next? I called one of the speakers who was coming to a forum at Safari Restaurant. Ironically, the week before the Friday night event, I got an award from a Somali community organization for all the great work I had done, just to show you where we are. So I didn't ask for the award, I didn't need an award, I don't need plaques, but I'm proud that somebody thinks I'm doing a good job, so I accepted it, and I was touched. And then you put out a flyer that went on and on and on about what I was doing. I have a copy of it. And it went out to the community, and it was an attack. It wasn't a dialogue. You and I have had a dialogue when we have. But when we're not talking, you're attacking. And that's not constructive. We can disagree. We disagree. I don't feel attacked. When you and I talk, I don't feel attacked. But a flyer went out saying these experts are coming to Minnesota, and we're going to go through the Minnesota pilot program and talk about all of these terrible problems with the Minnesota pilot program. That's what the flyer said. So I caught one of these guys is a former FBI agent, and he gives a lot of speeches, and he's anti-CBE, and that's fine. My question to him was, do you know what we're doing here? Do you know what our pilot program is before you come here and attack it? And he said, that's not why I'm coming. I'm coming to talk about how CBE works, the Prevent program, and things that have gone on before. I said, okay. So well, while I got you on the phone, why don't I explain to you what our program is? After I got off the phone with him, I got an email from CARE saying we'd like to meet with you to talk about the pilot program after the flyer had gone out. And so we had a meeting, and we had a very constructive meeting. I still got accusations, but that's okay. A number of the things that the people from CARE said at that meeting, we incorporated into and made changes as a result of what we heard. Argument about selective listening, I disagree with. I just got to tell you. So I heard things. I've heard things from CARE. I've heard things from others. I've heard things today that all go into what we're doing. So yes, I called one of the speakers and I asked him why he was going to attack what we were doing. Did he even know what it was? And he said he didn't, and then we all met. I thought that was helpful. When you say that I missed an opportunity by not speaking up when the Al-Shabaab video came out, I may be mistaken, but I don't recall anybody saying we're putting out something, we want you to be with us. I don't recall that. But I will tell you this. My reaction to that video was, it was one guy putting out a video listing a number of malls. I watched the whole thing. And I didn't think law enforcement or somebody in my position should give it credence, because I didn't think it was a real threat. I didn't want to scare anybody. I didn't want to draw attention to it. That's what went through my mind. We can disagree with that. But I don't believe I have ever missed an opportunity to speak up for this community. I have done it with the reporters who are here, with the reporters who haven't been here. I am very passionate about the success of this community. I brought community members to my synagogue, something that has never happened before. And 350 people from my synagogue were there. They packed the place, and they gave a standing ovation at the end that didn't want to end. And we're talking about more events like that. CARE should be part of that. What I find disturbing is that rather than dialogue, when I go with the committee or without the committee, or the committee goes without me, either way, when we go to civic leaders to seek funding for the very same resources we're talking about, they get barraged with phone calls and emails, many of which begin with CARE, some of which have implicit threats about you better not work with these guys. That's divisive. I don't want to fight you. I want to work with you. I have been listening carefully about the resources. If there's a better way to do this, I'm all ears. What I don't like are attacks, name-calling, and accusations, and false rumors about what I or anybody else is doing. I call for that to stop. Your organization is a civil rights organization. I am a passionate believer in civil rights. That's why I accepted the invitation to come address the leadership of CARE without any hesitation. I agree with much of what you stand for. But we should not be throwing out attacks and name-calling in order to derail something you disagree with. Because it not only demeans the effort, it demeans the really top-notch, good people who are working on it and support it from the Somali community, who I trust and I'm getting to know. So, Sadiq, perhaps you're the person to do this, but I ask for dialogue, not attacks. I ask for constructive conversation about the best way to do it. This problem is so important that everybody needs to be part of the solution. And as I promised you when we met, my role will decrease and decrease because the community needs to lead it. I feel like I can be a catalyst, I can be helpful to get it off the ground, but I will step back. I will not write checks, and whatever guarantees in writing anybody needs about surveillance and spying, we will put in writing. We are already working on that right now. I have no problem with that. So I want to be as transparent as possible. I don't want to be anybody's hero. I want action, I want solutions, and the people in this room, and unfortunately some who've left, are the people who are going to do it. You've all been working on this a long time before me, and you'll be working on it long after I'm gone. So let me just help. Let me be your partner. I can be a silent partner, I can be a step back partner, but let's do it together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thornton. You want to make a final statement?
Yeah, Thornton should get the floor.
So, back there, I thought he was promoted to headquarters, not here anymore, but I'm glad to see him. I'm not feeling well today, but I could not miss the opportunity to come here and share my views with you guys. Mr. Thornton said wondering why people don't trust or don't want to cooperate, or why we suspect what the FBI is doing. I have been following this problem, recruitment and radicalization, since 2006, when the first youth group went to Al-Shabaab. I've studied global, nationally. I studied all the counter-radicalization models around the world, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Europe, all over the world, UK. I, as a member of the community, submitted a proposal to Mr. E.K. Wilson in 2010, requested the same resources that Mr. Lugal is now offering. Mr. E.K. is here, my witness. He submitted it to Mr. Arif Ali Khan, who used to be the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. They took it to Washington, D.C. They used it to formulate national policy that just come out and develop this funding stream for this issue. The problem we are having with this pilot program is not because we don't want the resources. The problem is you guys are voicing the word. You are mixing law enforcement and social services that we need together. We are merging the ones. The best thing that we know this national program, this pilot program in the 3 cities, is co-managed by the Justice Department and the National Counter-Terrorism Center. You guys are not responsible for social services or education or job or economic development. Your job is to prosecute criminals, investigate crimes. We want you to stick to your job and not try to be the heroes that will be to anybody else. Just to stay your job. That's one problem we have with the violent problem. So let me finish, Mr. Please. The government talks too much to us. We need to talk back. Give us a chance. You are our guest today. So thanks. The best thing, we need the resources. Our community is poor, it's vulnerable, we need the resources. But we don't need it from the FBI or the National Counter-Terrorism Center. The US government is bigger. The Education Department of Education could fund. We're talking about a couple of $1 million. It's not a lot of money. The whole pilot project is, the budget was $15 million for 3 states. It's not a lot of money we bring into the table here. That could be done through other government agencies, not through law enforcement agencies. Our community have historical mistrust in law enforcement, and we have current suspicions and mistrust as Muslims and Americans towards law enforcement. I study these issues on a daily basis. I consider myself an expert in these issues. I know the aggressive tactics that the FBI is using. I want to give you a reason why I lost faith in the FBI as a member of the Somali community. I want to let everybody know, I have a witness here, Mr. E.K. Wilson. A couple of years ago, I volunteered information to the FBI. I called the local FBI office and told them about radical youth in our community, because I was trusting the FBI at that time. I was willing, out of my national responsibility and my civic duties and my moral responsibility, to stop those kind of things. But after a while, there was an arrest in Portland, Oregon, of a young Somali guy named Mohammed. Before the FBI arrested that man, a year before they arrested him, I knew his father suspected him, talked to the FBI in Portland, Oregon, and tell him, hey, my son is acting weird, please confiscate his passport, add him to the no-fly list, he's trying to join Al-Shabaab. But the FBI betrayed that trust, went behind the father's back, sent an FBI undercover informant to recruit and radicalize that young boy, gave him money, gave him false bombs, and arrested him, calling him the Christmas bomber in Portland, Oregon. That's why we don't trust you. That's why we don't consider you as partners. That's why we don't want to be associated with the pilot program. Please, we need the money, but we don't need you to be dishing out the money. Remove yourself from that program or we'll shut. Simple. Thank you very much.
Appreciate, sir. I want to have a conversation with you. This has nothing to do with anybody wanting to be a hero. And it has nothing to do with what I think you said is to stick to what you do, investigate and prosecute crimes. People who have my job throughout the country and for decades in the past have done this work, what I'm doing now. This pilot program is simply a replication of anti-gang and anti-crime efforts that have gone on forever with U.S. attorneys leading it. So let me just tell you how my job has been explained to me by the people who preceded me and by the people in Washington. So the reason I couldn't be here last week, I was invited to speak last week, is because I went to Washington. I spent the entire week with all the United States attorneys around the country at the Department of Justice. And we had sessions on many topics, fighting heroin, gangs, lots of things. So I want to make sure we're connecting, okay? Because I hear you loud and clear, and I want you to hear where I'm coming from. The very first session that all of us, all 93 U.S. attorneys had with the people at the Department of Justice was about how we are listening to and responding to concerns in the communities that we come from. Number one topic, and that includes using our offices to help bring federal resources to our communities. I am not dishing out money. As Representative Khan said, there'll be a process. There's going to be a state appropriation. I'm not going to handle that money. Corporations around Minnesota are going to pool together money to help deal with these solutions. Nobody is asking me to write checks. I don't do that. There will be a small amount of money that my office gets to do things like hire somebody from the community to work on these issues. The vast majority, and you said $15 million, it's in the president's budget, that's correct. But the Department of Education, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, federal agencies all have funds that can be used and are being used to serve underserved communities around the United States. I'll give you one example. There's a whole part of the Department of Justice that's not involved in law enforcement. They're grant makers. They get money from Congress to make grants. Last year, $70 million for underserved schools. $70 million around the United States, not here. So I said to the people who organized this CBE stuff in Washington, after listening here and in St. Cloud to concerns about the schools and how do we make the schools more accessible for Somali students, is there a way to do that, and can that be funded from the $70 million that's going to be spent around the United States? I'm not going to spend that money, sir. I'm not going to write the checks. I have no idea how to do that. I just respond to the concerns in the community, meet with the community leaders who tell me what the problems are, and then I match the two together. And I want Sadiq and his committee, if you've got a committee, be a part of that. If the community says, if everybody here says, we don't want one dime of that $70 million to assist Somali students in a variety of ways, then that's the decision. It's not my decision, that's your decision. I just want to make sure those opportunities are available. And so yes, important part of my job is to investigate crimes. But it's been made very clear to me by all my predecessors who worked on issues in Indian country, issues in the Hispanic community with gangs, issues in the Northside community, that being involved in bringing resources where the community says they're needed is part of my job. And I take it very seriously. You don't have to trust me at all. I appreciate that. We don't know each other. But I'm very passionate about this because this is what the community asked me to do. In all of the meetings that I went to, the final question was always, what are you going to do about it? Because listening and talking was getting nobody anywhere. And so if I didn't do this, if I didn't participate in anything, you call it CVE, you call it whatever you want, if I didn't do this, I am absolutely certain that we would be here today and I would be criticized by people who are in this room right now for not doing anything. So I can't, either way, I'm going to get criticized. I'd rather be criticized for acting and doing it in a way that the community asked for, by bringing people here to resolve issues at the airport, by bringing job fairs here, by making introductions to corporate America, and by at least pointing federal dollars to the issues here, because they're going to be spent somewhere. Why not have them spent here on behalf of great community organizations? That's my response to you. I appreciate your response. I want you to know where I'm coming from.
Did they answer the latter part? You wanna? Hold on a second, sir.
Hello.
Hold on a second. I think he was asking you about the case of Portland.
I don't know about that.
I will make it short. I appreciate your first answer, pointing out that this is part of your job as a attorney, U.S. Attorney General, U.S. District Attorney. I know the Justice Department has programs for community issues. I started this when I was submitting my proposal, and Todd Jones was here, so I'm aware that your office has some mandate to do this kind of programs. But I want you guys to understand that the community have historical mistrust law enforcement from back home. And also we have enough reasons. One of them I gave you an example for Portland, Oregon, for mistrust law enforcement here. And when you mix these two issues, it becomes too poison chalice for us to take any money from money deposit. I would like to help my community, get resources from my government, and offer after school programs, art programs, my youth members. But if you give me $1 million today, they will suspect me as an spy. Nobody will come and benefit from my program. So basically, you are undermining the program, knowing the community history from back home, and here the current history with the FBI coverage of state operations and these informant issues. You should understand our suspicion, distrust in this matter. But I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
No, let him address. Let him address.
I want you to respond. Go ahead.
All right, so sometimes it's about perspective. Use the term sting operations and these sorts of things. Understand that anytime we engage with a source, an undercover agent, or whatever, we have again, we have a basis to believe that that individual has a propensity or is already predisposed to commit that act. The use of those techniques is simply a way to gather evidence. Ask yourself this question: if you're not predisposed to commit a criminal act, can someone talk you into it? If you're a law-abiding citizen going out doing your normal business, and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, come help me rob this bank," what are you going to say to them? You're going to look at them like they've lost their mind. Okay? On the other hand, if you're a bank robber, somebody comes up and says, and so forth, that may be an informant, but we're trying to gather evidence because you already are a bank robber, historically. We're not going to see everything the same way, but having a dialogue, having an opportunity to share our thoughts, share our perspectives, hear different perspectives and different opinions is part of the process. That's part of what will allow us to get better, to make progress, and to one day, off into the future, feel like we have solved the problem within this community, within our community, to where we're not talking about terror recruiting. My hope is that, again, someday soon, we don't ever have to talk about terror recruiting again. We may still be talking about jobs and equality and opportunities and so forth. Those may be ongoing, as they are in many communities across the country. But let's get to the point where we can concentrate our efforts on things like jobs, business ownership, other economic opportunities, educational opportunities, those sorts of things, and not be, putting time, effort, and energy into preventing young Somali Americans from Minnesota to travel and fight for ISIL or any other terrorist organization. Thank you very much.
I want to thank our guests. This will be ongoing conversation we're going to have. We want to thank them for their valuable time. I want to thank you. We will continue to have this dialogue. God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much. Good night.